It was a peaceful night at Oakwood Hospital, the kind where everything seemed to be in its right place. The sterile walls of the emergency room reflected the soft glow of overhead lights, and the silence was occasionally broken by the quiet shuffle of nurses' shoes on the polished floors. The night shift staff moved with a calm efficiency, exchanging soft words as they checked on their patients, preparing for what they assumed would be another uneventful evening. The usual hum of machines, the faint rustling of papers, and the far-off clink of medical instruments filled the air, adding to the sense of routine. There was no urgency, no chaos, just the steady rhythm of a hospital that seemed to be at rest. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the stillness was suddenly pierced by the sound of the emergency room's automatic doors sliding open. At first, no one paid much attention. They were accustomed to the arrival of patients, ambulances, and occasional emergency staff. However, what came through those doors wasn't what they expected. A large German shepherd, its fur matted with dirt and twigs, appeared in the doorway. Its eyes held a look of exhaustion, but also determination, as if on a mission. In its mouth it carried something wrapped in an old cloth, carefully cradled in its jaws. The staff exchanged surprised glances, momentarily frozen by the unusual sight. The dog moved cautiously but purposefully, walking straight into the room, its gaze never leaving the bundle it held. The night had shifted from quiet and predictable to something far more mysterious. The German shepherd, now inside the emergency room, paused just beyond the threshold, his deep, steady gaze locking onto the medical staff. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the dog stood motionless, his body language calm but urgent. In his jaws, wrapped in an old tattered cloth, was something that immediately drew the attention of everyone in the room. It wasn't just an object. It was a tiny, fragile baby, its skin pale and its tiny chest rising and falling irregularly. The child's limbs were limp, the small body shivering, and the faint sound of labored breathing filled the air. Nurses exchanged worried looks, unsure how to react to this bizarre, urgent situation. One of them, her hand over her mouth in shock, stepped forward hesitantly. "Is this real?" she whispered, unable to comprehend the sight. Another nurse moved to approach, her heart racing as she observed the dog's calm demeanor, which contrasted with the urgency of the baby in his jaws. "It's a baby," one of the doctors gasped, her voice trembling. It didn't make sense. How could a dog, a retired police canine, bring in an infant, let alone one in such critical condition? The questions rushed through the staff's minds, but there was no time for them. The medical team swung into action, their training taking over as they rushed to assess the baby. The fragile infant, weak and malnourished, was quickly unwrapped, its icy skin sending a chill through the room. Despite the shock and disbelief, the hospital staff worked swiftly to stabilize the baby, their eyes occasionally glancing at the German shepherd, who remained motionless by the door, his eyes fixed on the child, waiting. The emergency room erupted into swift action as the medical team moved with practiced precision, their focus solely on the tiny infant brought in by the dog. Dr. Williams, the lead physician, immediately barked out orders, and the nurses rushed to gather the necessary equipment. The baby's skin was cold to the touch, its breathing faint and labored, and its body frail from neglect. "We need an IV stat," Dr. Williams instructed, his voice calm but urgent. A nurse quickly connected the baby to an oxygen supply, adjusting the flow to ensure the infant's weak lungs would receive the oxygen they so desperately needed. The room buzzed with the sound of rushing footsteps and beeping monitors, but amidst the chaos, one figure remained still. Max, the dog. The German shepherd had not moved from the doorway since entering the room. His posture was calm but alert, his deep eyes never leaving the baby. There was no barking, no growling, just a quiet, unwavering focus on the child. As the team worked tirelessly, a nurse could not help but glance at Max, sensing an intelligence and urgency in his gaze that mirrored the frantic pace of the medical staff. "He knows," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. Despite the commotion around him, Max stood as though he understood the gravity of the situation, his silent presence adding an unexpected layer of calm to the otherwise frantic room. The tension in the air was palpable as the team raced against time, but Max's watchful eyes seemed to carry a silent promise, as if he knew his mission was far from over. As the baby's condition began to stabilize, the frantic pace in the emergency room started to ease, but the mystery of how the child ended up there remained. Officer James, the lead investigator, arrived at the scene with his team to investigate the unusual circumstances surrounding the German Shepherd's sudden appearance. Max, standing at the doorway, seemed to acknowledge the presence of the officers, his gaze unwavering as if waiting for them to follow. With no other leads, Officer James decided to trust the dog's instincts. Max, without hesitation, began to walk toward the hospital exit, his tail low but steady. The officers followed closely behind, unsure of what they might uncover but certain they were on the right path. The streetlights cast long shadows as Max led them through quiet, dimly lit neighborhoods, finally halting in front of a dilapidated house at the edge of town. The house appeared abandoned, its front door slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Officer James motioned for his team to stay alert as they approached the threshold. The air was stale, and a faint odor of decay filled the space as they stepped inside. Max moved ahead with purpose, guiding them through the cluttered living room to a small, dimly lit room at the back. There, in the corner, stood a dusty crib, and scattered around it were signs of a family's desperate departure: an empty dog food bowl, a tattered blanket, and children's items strewn across the floor. On the table, a crumpled letter caught the officer's attention. As he read aloud, the words revealed the heartbreaking trust of a mother who, overwhelmed by hardship, had entrusted Max with her child's safety, hoping he would bring the baby to someone who could care for him. The letter made it clear that Max had been a protector, guarding the child in his final moments. With the discovery of the letter and the abandoned home, Officer James and his team knew they needed to find the child's mother. And fast. They began canvassing the nearby area, speaking to the few neighbors who still remained in the aging neighborhood. One elderly man, leaning heavily on his cane, recalled a young woman who had recently lived in the house. "She was always with a big dog," he said softly, nodding toward Max. "Seemed like she was going through something. I saw her with a baby once. Then she just vanished." The officers pieced together what they could and widened their search, suspecting the mother might still be nearby. After several hours, they received a report about a disoriented woman wandering through Maplewood Park. When they arrived, they found her seated on a bench beneath a barren tree, clutching herself tightly against the cold. Her coat was thin, her cheeks hollow, and her hair tangled. She didn't even look up when the officers approached. Detective James knelt down beside her, speaking in a calm, gentle voice. "Ma'am, we found a baby. A dog brought him to the hospital. Do you know anything about this?" The woman's eyes widened, filling with tears that spilled silently down her face. "My son, is he alive?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. She introduced herself as Elena and told them her story. Abandoned by her partner and unable to afford food or shelter, she had reached her breaking point. Max, the only companion she trusted, had become her family's guardian. In her desperation, she'd asked him to do the unthinkable: take her baby somewhere safe. And somehow he had. As the officers gently helped Elena to her feet, the truth settled in. Max hadn't just saved the baby. He'd saved a family. Elena was gently escorted into the hospital, her body weak from exhaustion, and her emotions barely held together. As she entered the pediatric unit, her steps slowed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The sterile scent of the hospital hit her like a wave, But none of it mattered the moment she saw the small bed surrounded by monitors and medical staff. There, lying still but breathing steadily, was her baby, Liam. His cheeks were no longer ghostly pale, and though wires and tubes still surrounded him, his tiny chest rose and fell with life. Elena's knees buckled as she rushed forward, tears spilling freely down her face. "Liam," she whispered, brushing her trembling fingers across his forehead. "You're alive." Standing quietly near the doorway was the German shepherd, Bruno. His once muddy fur was now clean, but his eyes held the same unwavering focus. He didn't move, simply watched, as if waiting for Elena's approval. The room was silent for a moment as she turned to look at him. "You did this," she said softly. "You saved him." Her voice cracked with emotion. Doctors and nurses stood by, deeply moved by the silent exchange. They had heard fragments of Elena's story, how she had been abandoned, how poverty and desperation had backed her into a corner, and how this loyal dog had been the only soul she could count on. And somehow, through loyalty and instinct, Bruno had delivered her child to safety. Elena bent down to meet his eyes, pressing a hand to his head. "I'll never forget this," she whispered. Bruno's tail gave the slightest wag, not in pride, but in calm confirmation. He had done what he was meant to do. The family he had guarded in silence was finally whole again. After several days of intensive care, Liam's condition steadily improved. The color returned to his cheeks, his breathing grew stronger, and the weak flickers in his eyes turned into focused glances filled with curiosity. Elena remained by his side every step of the way, never letting go of his tiny hand. Doctors were optimistic, and nurses often paused just to marvel at the resilience of the child, and the loyalty of the dog who brought him there. Bruno, the German shepherd, rarely left the hospital's waiting area, always sitting upright and alert, as if he knew his job wasn't finished until they walked out together. Finally, on a crisp, sunny morning, Elena was discharged. Holding Liam close to her chest, she stepped through the hospital doors into a world that suddenly felt full of promise. Bruno walked beside her, calm and steady, his posture proud but protective. As they returned to their small neighborhood, something unexpected awaited them. Strangers, touched by the story that had now spread across town, gathered at her doorstep with warm smiles and kind hearts. Some brought clothes and toys for Liam, while others handed Elena gift cards, food, and even job offers. It was more support than she ever imagined possible. Touched and overwhelmed, Elena thanked each person with tears in her eyes. Life had felt so hopeless just days ago, but now it was as if the world had opened up to give her a second chance. As Liam babbled softly in her arms, Bruno stood at the door, ears perked and eyes gentle, his duty far from over. He remained a constant presence, guardian, friend, and hero. Together they stepped into a new beginning, not defined by what they had lost, but by the community, love, and loyalty that surrounded them. In the quiet that followed the chaos, the true heart of the story began to shine. Not through words, but through the quiet gestures of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Bruno, the retired police dog who had once served with valor, had now fulfilled a mission no less heroic. He had carried a helpless child through danger, guided by instinct, memory, and the unspoken bond he shared with Elena. His actions not only saved Liam's life, but changed the course of both their futures. In a world that had turned its back on Elena, Bruno stood firm, never wavering in his duty. This journey was more than a story of survival. It was a testament to the strength found in loyalty. Bruno never asked for anything in return. He did not seek praise or recognition. He acted because he understood something deeper, that love is not always spoken, and sacrifice is often silent. Elena, once broken by hardship and loss, had now found a new beginning, not only because her son was alive, but because she had never truly been alone. In her darkest hour, someone had stood by her, unwavering and alert. As Liam's laughter slowly filled their home again and the community wrapped its arms around them, Elena often looked at Bruno with awe. He wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian, a protector, and a symbol of what it means to give without expecting anything in return. The bond between them, woman, child, and dog, had weathered despair and emerged stronger than ever. And in that bond was a reminder to everyone that even when the world feels cold, the quiet force of love and loyalty can restore hope and rebuild lives. Their story closed not with an ending, but with a beginning written in trust and unconditional devotion. News of Bruno's heroic act quickly spread beyond the hospital walls, weaving its way through the town like wildfire. People who had never met Elena or Liam suddenly felt connected to their story, touched by the image of a loyal German shepherd carrying a helpless baby through the night to safety. What began as a tale of desperation soon transformed into a symbol of resilience, and the community responded with open hearts. Local families donated clothes, toys, and food. A small business owner offered Elena part-time work, while a retired teacher volunteered to help her study for a certification course. Even those who had once passed her on the street without notice now stopped to offer words of encouragement and support. Elena, once invisible in her struggle, was now embraced with dignity and compassion. She had spent so long feeling like a burden to the world, but Bruno's actions reminded everyone, herself included, that no one is ever too lost to be found. The community didn't just help her survive, they gave her a chance to rebuild, to thrive. Bruno became more than a dog. He became a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice. His story was shared in newspapers, on local radio, and through social media, inspiring others to reflect on the quiet heroes in their own lives. Children painted pictures of Bruno and sent them to the hospital. An animal shelter reported a spike in adoptions, as people were moved by the connection between humans and animals. In the end, it wasn't just Liam who was saved. It was an entire family, a neighborhood, and perhaps even a town's sense of unity and compassion. Bruno's story proved that survival is just the beginning. What truly transforms lives is love, sacrifice, and the kindness of those who choose to care.